Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead coming to you from chilly Northwest Ohio. It has been freezing this week with these high winds that just cut through our old farmhouse that is surrounded by cornfields. So we're just busy trying to stay warm here. As of the day that this video comes out, I am 38 weeks pregnant and ready to have this baby any day now. I plan to be busy nesting this week, just cleaning up the house and preparing for baby and doing a lot of resting. But we had some unexpected problems arise and we are doing a kind of an emergency bathroom renovation, and there's construction everywhere in the house. So instead of cleaning, I decided to focus my nesting energy on doing some canning projects this week. And I'm going to bring you along for that. We're going to can some tomato jam, we're going to do some chili base, we're going to do refried beans, and we're also going to do a strawberry pie filling. It's perfect timing to do some canning because I looked at the number of empty jars that I was accumulating in the kitchen, and it was time to fill them before bringing them back down to the pantry. I like to continue to fill them until we hit about March, when it's time for them to empty in preparation for the growing season. So the first thing I decided to do was fill some quart jars with some frozen strawberries. We're going to make some strawberry pie filling. And I just have 6 quart jars here. And we thawed the strawberries just a little bit, enough to fill the jars here. And I'm just filling them all the way to the top with these frozen strawberries. This pie filling is going to be very similar to lots of my other canned pie fillings, like apple pie, peach pie that I've shown you before. The first thing we need to do is get a pot out and start making our pie goop. The first ingredients in our pie goo is 9.5 cups of water. And then after we have our water in there, we need to add our sugar. I do 4.5 cups of sugar. And then you need to add some kind of thickening agent. I prefer to use arrowroot powder, and to this recipe I'm going to add 2 cups of arrowroot powder. You could use a cup of clear gel or a cup of cornstarch, whatever thickening agent you prefer to put in your pie filling. They all are going to work the same. And then we want 1 teaspoon of salt. We're just going to stir that all together and get that on the stove. You'll notice when you first get that stirred together on the stove, it's almost a milk-like texture. It's very watery. And as it comes to a boil, it will begin to thicken, and that's when it turns into that almost glue-like goopy consistency. And that is what we want. That is going to be our pie filling. Now, since I like to measure out my fruit by filling my quart jars, I find that to be the easiest way to do it. I just then, since I already have the fruit in the jars, pour that goop over the top of them, and then I take a little chopstick and kind of swirl it around to fill in all the space in the jar in between the fruit. And I do this with all types of pie filling that I make. But if you wanted to, what you could also do is take your pot that already has the goo in it and dump all your fruit into it, mix it around, and then refill your jars with the fruit and goo mixture all together. Whichever one you prefer to do, I just, like I said, I'm just in the habit of putting the goop in over the fruit, but then you do have to grab that chopstick and make sure that you thoroughly mix the goo around so that you don't have big air pockets in your jar. It's pretty sticky, so we're going to wipe the rims of our jars and then get our lids out. I'm using 4 jars canning lids, and as always, you can get a 10% discount off your canning lids if you check out the link in this video description. You can use the link there and my code to get a discount on some quality canning lids. We're going to get the rings on these, and these are going to go into the water bath canner for 25 minutes. And when they're all done, we're going to have some lovely pie filling. But before it gets going in the canner, I like to add a little bit of distilled white vinegar to the pot. We have really hard mineral water, and that just prevents that mineral film from developing on the outside of our jars. So just a little bit, maybe like a half a cup of vinegar. And then after it processes for the 25 minutes, you can see that kind of cooked the strawberries, and the goo, instead of being that white milky color, is now a beautiful red color. And this is going to make some delicious meals of strawberry pie or strawberry shortcake. My next project for the week was to tackle the bags of frozen tomatoes that were packaged up in August and September. Raw tomatoes that are frozen like this really do begin to lose nutrients after about 3 months in the freezer. So if you put tomatoes in the freezer at the end of the summer, now is the time to get them out and put them in jars to kind of lock in and preserve the nutrition. Because if you wait much longer, you're just going to have, less of a nutritious product in the end. So we're just going to add a little bit of water to the bottom of our big cast iron roaster. And I'm going to put this in the oven on 350 degrees and just let them cook down and melt a little bit and release a lot of their juice. This was after maybe an hour in the oven, and you can see how much water was released from these tomatoes, and that is way too much. So to speed up the thickening process of our tomato sauce that we're going to make, I'm just going to take a ladle and scoop out as much of that extra liquid as I possibly can. So this is essentially tomato water or tomato juice, and we are not going to let this go to waste. I'm putting this in some jars, and this is great to add to maybe some rice that you're cooking, some beans. You can even put it in some soup. It freezes really well if you wanted to put some in the freezer and save it for later. But I'm just going to fill my jars up, and we're going to put some lids on these jars and put them in the fridge because I will definitely find a use for these somehow this week in either our cooking or our canning projects that we're planning to do. So don't waste that excess water. But the great thing is that by removing all of that water, our sauce here will thicken down a whole lot faster. So this is what I have left. I could have removed a little more water if I wanted to, but this was good enough for the job that I'm planning to use these tomatoes for. I'm just going to take my immersion blender and blend these up, skins and seeds and all, because we are going to make some chili base with these, and I don't mind having the skins and seeds in that. Now, I have made chili base or chili sauce for you guys many times before in different variations, and today's version is going to be another different variation. So this will be something I haven't shown you before, a way to make this. I'm starting with some onions here. These are some homegrown Patterson onions that we harvested from the garden back in July, I think, and they are doing wonderfully down in our cellar. They're storing well. We don't have any signs of rot or softness yet, so I'm very pleased with these Patterson onions. We're just going to get some of those chopped up, and then we have some homegrown garlic here, and we're going to do the same and chop that up. Normally, I would use my food processor to chop up all of my garlic and onion really finely, but unfortunately, I broke my food processor. It was about 12 years old, and I broke it a couple weeks ago, and so I'm waiting to replace that. So we're just going to chop these by hand in the meantime, and this is what we have to start with. For this batch of chili base, I'm going to use pint jars, and I can fit 9 pint jars in my standard size pressure canner. So I'm just splitting those onions amongst those 9 pint jars. It's probably the equivalent of about 1 small onion per pint jar. And then also the equivalent of 1 large clove of garlic per jar. And that's going to be the beginning of our base here. The next thing we're going to do is add some fermented chili powder. Now it's winter and I don't have access to raw hot peppers, so this is the next best thing. This is freeze-dried pulp from making some fermented hot sauce. I made it for Adam in 2023, and once I strained the pepper pulp out of the hot sauce, I went ahead and threw it on my freeze dryer trays and turned it into this really spicy chili powder. It's delicious. But it's been sitting there long enough that it really does need to be used up. So I started out with 1 tablespoon of it per jar, and then I just decided I'm going to use the rest of it up, and I'm just trying to empty the rest of this jar. It probably ended up being about the equivalent of 1.5 teaspoons, or I'm sorry, 1.5 tablespoons per pint jar. The next thing we're going to do is add some cumin, and I'm going to do 1 tablespoon of cumin. Now, when you're making a chili base, you're at liberty to use whatever spices you like. So whatever you want to put in your chili, it's not going to affect the safety of the recipe. Our next spice that I like to add to our chili is paprika, and I'm also going to do 1 tablespoon. Tablespoons seem like a lot, but they really aren't when all of these bases are going to end up making over a gallon of chili. I just added 1 teaspoon of chili powder since we already had a lot of that fermented chili powder in there. And then we're doing 1 tablespoon of salt per jar. Now it's time to top these off with our tomato sauce that we had blended up. So I'm filling the jars to leaving 1 inch headspace. Headspace is the space between the liquid line and the top of your jar. And then I'm going to stir all of that together, and you can see that that does affect the headspace, so I need to go back and refill with a little more extra sauce to maintain that inch. And then, as always, we do want to wipe our rims of our lids to ensure that we get a really good seal. We're going to place our lids on these, and these need to be processed in the pressure canner, and they're going to go in for 20 minutes. When I want to make a batch of chili, I will pull out one of these pint jars that has all of the seasonings and flavorings for the chili, and I'll grab out some jars of beans. I'll brown up some meat or get some home canned meat that I have in jars. We'll add some extra tomato sauce. Sometimes we like to add veggies like canned okra or corn or whatever we want to add to our chili. But having these bases just makes it so easy. And we had already done maybe 3 batches of this over the summer, and I am almost out. So we needed some more. You can see this one jar must have had some siphoning. Siphoning is where some of the liquid escapes, and I'm not quite sure what happened here, but this is something I definitely don't trust this jar. I'm not going to put this down on the pantry, even if the lid's sealed. We're going to go ahead and use this up because this is not safe to have this much headspace in that jar. So we had a busy night this week where I had to run to my midwife, and I put some chili in the crock pot for the children. I decided to go ahead and add a quart of that tomato water that we had put in the fridge, and then use up that jar of chili base that didn't quite look right coming out of the canner. And it made a delicious meal of chili for the children, which was wonderful on these cold, chilly evenings. That canning project did not use up all of our sauce here, so I need to come up with another way to use this. And I have some of that pie filling goop that is still left in the bottom of this pot. That pie filling goo is very sweet and will make a thick product. So I decided to go ahead and add the rest of this sauce to the pot and turn it into tomato jam. So I think that the pie filling will help thicken up my tomato jam a lot faster, and the sweetness of it will really be helpful. So I do not like the texture of the tomato skins and seeds in tomato jam. You want a really smooth texture when it comes to making tomato jam. So I'm using this old-fashioned food mill here to just remove the skins and the seeds. And as you can see, what we have underneath, all of that beautiful sauce ran through, and now we can get started making that tomato jam. So I'm going to add a little extra sugar. There was already some sugar in the pie filling that was in the bottom of the pot, but I'm just adding maybe 1.5 cups more to sweeten that up. If you've never had tomato jam, it's sort of like a really thick, spiced ketchup. And so we like to add cinnamon and ground cloves. I'm just kind of measuring it with my heart. That's not going to affect the safety of the canning project. But everybody kind of likes different spices in their tomato jam. This is just how my husband Adam prefers it. If you're kind of wondering and you're skeptical about this, the process of making this is very similar to making an apple butter. So you start out with an applesauce and you cook it down with your spices. We're just starting out with a tomato sauce, and we're doing the same thing. So the longer this sits on the stove, the water will evaporate out of it and it will thicken up. And when we're done, we'll have this delicious, spreadable tomato product that's really sweet, with a hint of spice to it. And Adam loves to eat it on things like toast or biscuits. I never can a lot of this because this is one of those things that you either love or you hate. Some people in my house love it and some don't like it. So I just can it in little half pints, and I just do a few jars throughout the year. And it's just something I'll bring out special for Adam every now and then. And we'll just eat it up until we finish one of these little half pint jars. For the most part, we use other kind of fruit-based, sweeter jams and jellies for our breads and things, but I just figured I had a small amount of sauce left and this was perfect, and that will make Adam very happy. So we're getting our lids on these jars. These are going to process in the water bath canner for 10 minutes. Doing this tomato jam had me thinking about apple butter. I love apple butter, and I'm assuming that as we get some more little half-pint jars emptied up, once I get enough for a full batch, we'll probably grab some of the apples out of storage that are in our fridge out in the garage and turn those into some apple butter. And the process for making apple butter is nearly identical to this. You're just using applesauce instead of the tomato sauce. I had a helper all week who was wanting to can with me. She tried some of that tomato jam and had it on her mouth. She enjoyed licking the spatula for me. So she must be one of the family members that actually likes the tomato jam. And here they go. They're all done. Adam will be very happy. My next project for the week was taking these dried pinto beans. We're going to make some refried beans, and I'm going to show you my process for doing that. So the first thing I'm doing is taking my 7 quart jars. That's enough for a full batch in my pressure canner. And I'm filling them approximately 1/3 of the way with the dried beans. The reason why we only fill them 1/3 of the way is because as they sit and soak in water, those beans will swell and they will end up filling the whole jar. And so a 1/3 of the way is about as much bean as that jar will be able to handle once they absorb all the water. So like I mentioned, we are going to top these off with water. And I'm going to add a little bit of apple cider vinegar to my water. You'll see me doing that. And that just helps break down the phytic acid in the beans, makes them easier to digest. And we'll let them sit out on the counter overnight and let them swell, let it break down all that phytic acid, and then in the morning they'll be ready to be canned. So this is what they look like in the morning. As you can see, they swelled pretty significantly. I didn't want them to fill the whole jar because we're going to add some other ingredients to our refried beans, but that is why you definitely want to watch how full you fill your jars with those beans, because if you go more than maybe 1/3 or a half of the way, you're going to have too many beans per jar. So the next thing I'm doing is draining out that soaking liquid from each jar and rinsing the beans so that they're nice and clean and they're ready to fill with our ingredients for the refried beans. I'm just adjusting because some of the jars are a little fuller than others, and I want to kind of even it out so they all have the same amount of bean in each jar. So the first ingredient I like to add to my refried beans is onion. And we're once again using up some of those homegrown Patterson onions that we have down in storage. Just going to chop these up and we're going to add some of that to each of the jars. You're going to add whatever ingredients and spices that you like in your refried beans to your jars of beans here. And when I spread this out, it's probably about half of a small onion per jar. And then I'm using garlic scape powder, just 1 teaspoon per jar. You could use regular garlic powder or fresh garlic if you wanted to chop that up and add it. I just have this garlic scape powder that I need to use up and just wasn't feeling like peeling garlic. So I took the easy way out. Next thing I'm doing is chopping up some uncured bacon. You do not want to can with cured meats. That isn't recommended. I feel confident that it's safe to can with uncured bacon, but this is definitely, this is my recipe. I would only advise that you do this if you feel comfortable, not necessarily 100% following the canning guidelines. So that's my disclaimer. I am not a master canner, but I've been making this for 10 years without issue. Next thing I'm adding is 1 teaspoon of cumin per jar, and I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of oregano per jar. Those are the seasonings that I like to have in my refried beans. And then we also need to add our salt. We're just doing 1 teaspoon of salt. Now I found the perfect use for the rest of that tomato water that we had used in another project earlier in the week. Just going to get that all mixed up. Now, that 1/2 gallon isn't going to be enough to obviously fill all of these jars, but it'll give some nice tomato flavor, and I'm just going to kind of spread it out evenly in all of these jars, and then we'll fill it the rest of the way with just regular water. You could also fill with chicken or beef broth, ham broth, any kind of liquid that you want to give extra flavor here to your refried beans. We're going to get these all wiped down, get our lids on, get our rings on, and these are going to go in the pressure canner for 75 minutes. And the advantage of canning it like this is everything is all cooked all together, all your flavorings and seasonings are there. When I want to make some refried beans, all I have to do is dump one of these jars into a pan and kind of fry it up, smash down all of the beans, and it's like instant refried beans. They're so delicious. We'll eat them on tortillas throughout the winter, or sometimes I'll just make beans and rice, and it's always a hit with the kids. They absolutely love it. So I'm happy to have 7 more of these meals in jars headed down to the pantry. This will be a wonderful addition, and we'll make some really easy meals once the baby comes, because that's what I'm looking for. Easy meals in jars has been the theme of the year in my canning if you've been following along this year throughout the growing season. We put quite a dent in the empty canning jars that I had accumulated in the kitchen, and I have some left here. I'm going to wait until I get a full batch of 1/2 pint or even pint jars, and we're going to make some apple butter next. But I'm getting ready now to bring all of these canned jars back down to the pantry, and I need to make sure to update my inventory so that it accurately reflects everything that we have down in the pantry as we head into our pantry challenge we're going to be doing in January and February. So I did a video a couple of weeks ago on my pantry inventory system. I'll link that in the video description if you're curious about what I'm doing here by creating these little boxes. But anytime something goes down to the pantry or comes up from the pantry, I get out this book and I make sure that I reflect what I'm doing so that my inventory is accurate. All right, guys, that is it for this week. I might be back next week with another video, or I might be snuggling a newborn. We're kind of at that part of the month where I could have a baby in the next couple hours, or it could still be another couple weeks. You just kind of never know. But I'm hoping that we will soon finish all of this construction that's currently happening in the house. I can get the house all clean and ready for baby and just enjoy these last moments of pregnancy. But if baby hasn't come by next week, I'll be back with another video. I'm hoping to make some homemade pasta for you next week. I hope all of you are having a wonderful week and staying warm wherever you are. I know a lot of the country got hit by snow and high winds this week. It is just really cold out there. So, okay, friends, thanks for being here. We will keep you updated on the baby watch and see you just as soon as we can. All right, friends, have a blessed week. Bye.